If you've been training for any time at all, you start to understand that there's general training that's focused on foundational strength and health, and then there's specific training that focuses on performance in our sport. And one of the things that we sort of miss out on as climbers is this middle ground of general training for the hands and wrists in order to help us with our finger strength. And that's what we're going to talk about today. When we look at the muscle action and the movement associated with holding onto the rock, a whole lot of it is this isometric positioning. And sometimes we'll use an open hand position, sometimes we're closed down and crimping, but almost everything is isometric or what they call quasi-isometric, where there's a little bit of movement in the joints. But the problem with developing a ton of strength in these very specific positions is that that strength is limited to those specific positions. There's a quality of fitness called joint angle variation, and when we're training in isometrics, it's well known that we get only strong in that particular joint angle or just slightly one way or the other. And so what I want to talk about today is, in the name of injury prevention, what other types of exercises could we add to our hand and finger strength programs in order to reduce injury and potentially increase strength more quickly? When we think about general grip and hand training, we're really looking at 4 different goals. The first goal, of course, is injury reduction. We would love to create a training situation that allows us to reduce our injuries that we're going to sustain from finger strength training or injuries we would sustain at the crag. A second possible benefit of this training would be to increase the blood flow and the muscular endurance in that area. We're really just building some more capacity there. We also have the possibility of actually increasing your finger strength in those isometric positions by developing that peripheral general strength around those positions. And then the fourth thing we're looking for is potential hypertrophy in the forearm muscles. Now, getting bigger forearms doesn't necessarily mean more strength, but it does lead to a greater potential for adding strength further down the road. And so when we think about this kind of strength training in those 4 terms, there's pretty good reason to add a little bit of it into your training program. Hey climbers, I know that ClimbStrong is a coaching company, and I feel like we've got the best coaches in the business. I also think that we have the best training programs in the business, and we put all of those up on our training platform, and you can check it out for just 12 bucks a month. This is going to let you, as a self-coach climber, build the program that you want, that's going to lead you to better results, and we've got great tracking metrics and everything else on there, so go check it out. When we look at general grip training, a lot of us will think about spring-loaded grippers or maybe like rolling a weight up with our wrists. There's a few different tools out there that have become really popular, but if we think about the muscle actions or the way that we're using the wrists and hand, we can divide those into 5 major exercise types. The first type, like those spring-loaded grippers, is what we call crushing. And that's when you're squeezing the hand down, closing a weight or a gripper against the palm of your hand. And we can do that with a dynamometer. We can actually do that by pulling down on an edge and flexing the fingers through that movement, like with a block, or we can use those squeezy grippers. The really important thing with this is to make sure that we're still overloading the muscles and the structure of the hand. And so the lightweight elastic donuts or the foam ones really aren't appropriate. Those are fine in a rehab setting, but when we're trying to gain strength, we really want to look at using these steel heavy spring grippers. There's a lot of different exercises we can do there, but this is a real simple one to implement, and you can get pretty good high tension grippers online from a company called Iron Mind. They have a line called the Captains of Crush Grippers, and it's a really high quality product, and they come in several different resistances. That's a wonderful adjunct to your normal finger strength training and is the first step in preventing overuse injuries in just those static positions. The second kind of strength that we can build in the hands and wrists is what we would call rotational strength. And that's going to be your twisting that you can do. You can do that by doing a wrist roller. You can also think of it in terms of radial and ulnar deviation. And we can do radial and ulnar deviation by using a little dumbbell that's weighted on one end, or like my personal preference is a small sledgehammer. And I can just move my wrist side to side with that and try to create a little bit more wrist stability and strength there. This exercise is a really common prescription from physical therapists when we have wrist problems. Whether we've got a TFCC or just weak wrist capsule altogether, this sort of thing, building some strength in those different ranges of motion, is a very common prescription, and it's not a bad thing to do preventatively. This is another way to build some of that crazy weird strength that you need in trad climbing or in some of the boulder problems we're seeing these days. The third major way of building strength in the hands is just that isometric training. When we think of isometric training, we generally think just in terms of hangboarding or pulling a block off the floor, climbing like positions, but that's not the limit of all of this stuff. You can hold on to a big fat barbell. You can do dead hangs on a fat pull-up bar. You can do all kinds of different things where we're holding isometric positions, but not in specific climbing modes. And so think about things away from the hangboard. Think about things in the weight room. Think about using different implements at home and trying to develop isometric strength in modes that aren't exactly the same as climbing. A really great example would be moving big pieces of wood around or picking up bags of feed or any of these things where you're having to grip stuff and move it around. These are all really valuable ways of addressing strength in the hands that aren't quite specific to climbing, but may be a way of, again, preventing injury, increasing capillarity, and potentially increasing general strength in that forearm. The fourth type of exercise is pinching, and that's where we're actually pushing a load between the fingers and the thumb. And there are cool tools for this. There's a thing called the Titan's telegraph key. There's a little thing called the hub that's a tool that you'll pinch down and try to pick up off the floor. But implementing that thumb is really critical, and especially if you're climbing this 3D stuff, the big stalactites and tufas, if you have a lot of pinchy blocks like you might at the climbing area rifle, that thumb really comes into play. And whether or not that's present in your particular climbing area at home, it's still a really good way of generating more strength in the hand and better overall hand health. And so the pinching exercise implements the thumb. And when we think about crushing, that's pulling the fingers against the palm generally, and then pinching will pulling the fingers against the thumb. So they're subtly different, but it is a completely different exercise. The fifth exercise is wrist flexion and extension. And these are wonderful exercises. They're easy to do in a weight room. And the two main exercises we'd see there are simply the wrist curl, done with the palm facing up and curling a weight up and folding that wrist closed, and then flipping it around and doing a reverse wrist curl where you're opening that wrist under load. Those two exercises are excellent for developing hypertrophy, general strength in the forearm, and especially wrist strength. People that suffer from weak wrists or wrists that tend to get injured can really benefit from this exercise, and they're very simple to implement. I love the wrist curl and reverse wrist curl as part of a warm-up to get those forearms, get those elbows warmed up. They're excellent as part of a rehab protocol for bad elbows or bad wrists. And I think as soon as you start playing with these and you start seeing the benefit of them and how quickly they can work for you, you might think, gosh, this is a worthwhile addition to the training that I'm doing. Now, there's a thing called pattern fatigue that happens in sports where if an athlete is doing something in the performance environment, in this example, pulling on small edges, and then in the training environment, their training is focused around also pulling on small edges, all of a sudden we're getting this pattern fatigue where we're really overloading one specific facet of strength, and the supporting facets of strength, the antagonists and the supporting muscles, are not overloaded. Something really crazy happens, and that is that the body shuts down development of that particular ability because it can sense, in a way, that those supporting structures are not strong enough. This is really common in weightlifting when somebody gets very strong at the pressing exercises like a bench press and they cannot progress. Often a smart strength coach will say, hey, let's see how our pulling structures and our stabilizing muscles are to make sure that we're going to be able to get this athlete stronger. And we want to do the same thing here. If we're limited on how strong we can get here, it's worth looking at how strong are the antagonists, how strong are the stabilizers, how strong are all of the structures around this, and do I have the work capacity in order to do more finger strength training? Lots of times people just come up against this wall of I cannot do any more training because this one particular pattern is too tired to do anymore. And so if that feels like it's you, one of your solutions might be creating more general grip strength. We don't have to do a ton of this. I think if you do 2 or 3 sets of general grip strength training in any of these 5 major exercise patterns, that's an excellent start in injury prevention and building a little bit more stability in that forearm and in the fingers. If you're constantly getting injured, if you're feeling like you're not developing any more ability in specific climbing movement, this might be something that's worth looking at. General training is foundational, and it's really critical to understand that unless we have this big foundation, it's very hard to move and put specific training on top of it. So if you're feeling hung up, if you're feeling like you're tapped out and you can't train anymore, think about moving a little bit outside the box of specific climbing training. See if there's something else that might help you move forward.